Okay, and we're live. Welcome to the third edition of Community Currencies Now, where we talk to the leading experts in mutual credit, UBI, and all the cool community currency projects that are happening inside and outside of crypto, because it's time that we make these bridges and actually learn from the people on the ground fighting the fight and doing the good work. So today, I'm Griff Green. I represent the Common Stack, and we are building economies around causes. So you generally trying to support nonprofit public goods. And I'm joined today with Matthew. Matthew, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'll introduce myself during my talk.
Okay, sounds good. Well, he's an OG in the community currency space, to say the least. And then we also have Eliza.
Hi. Shall I introduce myself in my talk as well? Follow your lead.
Eliza needs no introduction.
I'm just a person.
Human, and she's great. And then Julio is also joining us today. And maybe Julio, since he doesn't have a talk, hopefully he can.
Hi everybody, my name is Julio Linares. I'm from Guatemala, currently based in Berlin, working on Circles UBI, which is sort of a weird hybrid between mutual credit, crypto, and also a basic income system. Yeah, happy to be here. I'll be checking on questions, so please, if you have any questions, put them on the YouTube. And yeah, happy to hear the discussion.
Yeah. Well, hopefully this will be a very interactive discussion. So if you are watching live, please don't be shy. Ask questions and we will get to them. So Matthew, you want to start us off?
Can you see my screen?
It looks great.
Well, I haven't got keyboard control over it, so we might be going through like this. So I've been doing community currencies for about 15 years. And in that process, I built open source software for LETs and time banks. And it's hosted for free by an organization called Community Forge, which is based in Geneva, Switzerland. And today, I want to talk about the other monetary paradigm. Because since Bitcoin came along, a lot of people have been coming into alternative currencies believing that money is a commodity or an asset, and it's a special type of asset. But in fact, throughout monetary history, money has been viewed in different ways at the same time. And it's not quite that money is one thing or it's another thing. It's more like there are different ways of looking at money or perceiving it or treating it. So I've put a picture here of the wave-particle dilemma, because it's a bit like that. It's how you see money. So we're trying to get away from the money is a token which gets its value from some magical place into something a bit more complete. So I want to touch on the very beginnings of money. This is even before the palace money systems. There were ideas in many ancient societies that you would incur debts between families, between villages, between individuals. And then there were standard ways of paying off the debts. And the thing with which you would pay off the debt was money. And I mention this because it's very hard to imagine money without debt. Money and debt are intimately interrelated. So fast forwarding a little bit to ancient Greece, many people often cite the coins of Lydia as the first example of coinage and physical money, but they don't know that at the same time, it is reported that in Sparta, Lycurgus commanded a new kind of money which didn't have any metallic value at all. And the text says that it was to prevent odious distinction and inequalities between the citizens. But there could have been other benefits as well. For example, commodity money wouldn't have left the city. that it would have facilitated internal trade in the city. Moving fast forward again very quickly to the age of explorations, that's about 1400. Between countries for trade, they were using bullion a lot. There was a lot of silver going back and forth on the ships, and they still dig it up sometimes when they find sunken ships at the bottom of the ocean. But at the same time, trade across Europe was conducted by a network of banks using a unit of account called the écu de marque, and it had no physical form whatsoever. It was purely a measure of debt. And also within England and some other countries, they used tally sticks, which again, they had no value in themselves. The purpose of a tally stick was to record an amount of debt, and they would fit together so that the creditor and the debtor could be provably linked. Moving forward another couple of hundred years, a little after the Bank of England was founded, they were trying to decide what money really was, and they asked John Locke, a libertarian philosopher, and he said that silver is the instrument of commerce by its intrinsic value. So he was very much on the commodity money side of things. But only 10 years later, John Law, who was well known for inventing the lottery for the French king, said that money is not the value for which goods are exchanged, but the value by which goods are exchanged. And in that, he's pointing to money being a quantity of value, a measurement of the amount of value, like the meter instead of a meter of something. And so he's saying that money is abstract. It's a way of measuring what you produce against what you consume. Later on in the Victorian era, we have the same paradigm cropping up again. The British had just invented the gold standard, and I understand they were starting to run out of gold. They were getting pressure on the banks. So these two different schools of economics arose about what to do about it. And one school said, well, paper money should be 100% backed by gold. And the other school said there should be no reserve requirement on banknotes. So one is trying to anchor money to a commodity, and the other one is saying, well, no, probably you just need gold for withdrawals. But I would point out that even within the gold standard, you have this dilemma. On the one hand, gold is money, and on the other hand, the paper money that people are passing around in a gold standard is only a promise of gold. It's not the gold itself, and so there's trust in it. You could even call that paper a credit note for the gold. And similarly, think about internet currencies where you have gold in an account in Switzerland or Singapore or somewhere like that, and your account balance on your screen tells you how much money it is, and you kind of own that gold, but all you've got is the promise of that gold from the company. So it's a kind of credit again. All the time be thinking about how do you look at it, not what is it. If you try and ask what money is, you'll get in a mess very quickly. So moving to the modern era, you can still look at your bank deposit and say, well, look, I've got stuff in the bank. I've had a bank manager say that to me. Your money is in the bank, as if I brought my notes and I put them in the bank and they were downstairs in the vault. But on the other hand, it's not really how it works. And in 2014, the Bank of England announced that money is created when the bank extends credit. And so I'd like to ask, what's the best kind of money? Well, money has many different functions, and we don't have much time to go into these. But if you look at those 4 functions as defined by William Stanley Jevons in about the 1860s, notice that a medium of exchange, you can think of it as a piece of value like a coin of gold, or you can think of it as a piece of credit. It works just as well either way. With a store of value, that kind of suggests that you want it to stay the same value over a long period of time. And what commodities actually do that? Some commodities go up in value, some commodities wobble in value, but none of them is actually going to stay the same value, because obviously the value of all things is relative and changes constantly. When you look at the two abstract functions that I've called here the quantification functions, again, it's essential for both that they stay the same value. And so no commodity can stay the same value in relation to all other commodities unless somebody is doing massive market intervention. And so with commodity money types, they always need central management, and that can be very expensive and risky for the government. And just on the medium of exchange again, what's the point in having a medium of exchange that prevents you from exchanging because you haven't got it? Like if I need to acquire some gold in order to buy something before I can sell something, then the medium of exchange is getting in the way. And so credit makes a much better medium of exchange because it's much easier to acquire, principally because you don't have to dig it out of the ground in the first place, but also you don't have to go to rich people to get credit. So is credit a good form of money? Well, if you look at these five-ish properties that have been deduced from Aristotle, rather incorrectly, I think, you'll find that credit meets all of those criteria. Well, it's not exactly portable because it doesn't exist, but you don't have the problem of carrying a ton of corn to marketplace with you. Credit is absolutely divisible, just like a meter. It's absolutely durable, just like a meter. Is credit valuable? Well, it depends who's backing it. And so we'll get to that in a minute. And is credit fungible? Again, it depends who's backing it, because my credit, that's to say my promises to you, are probably going to be worth a different amount on the marketplace to your promises to me, for example, because it depends on how much I'm trusted and how much I'm known. So the two types of money, this is my own work, can be seen from different political perspectives. So I put a few down here on the slide. Asset money is good for a store of value because the economy doesn't really miss it and it's actually valuable. Whereas credit money, as I've explained, is better as a medium of exchange. But there's a problem with asset money that it becomes scarce and it's easy to corner the market in asset money. And so that tends to mean that rich people control the asset money, they hoard it, and then they kind of rent it to the poor. And so if all the money is assets, then it tends to become a game of rich people extracting money from poor people. And the benefit of credit money is that you can just create it out of nothing as needed. You don't have to transport it, and record keeping is cheap. And that's why throughout history, you see these different political interests. Always the rentier class is pursuing an asset view of money, and the trader class and the working classes are more interested in an asset liability view of money. It's pointed out in this slide some of the differences from a more mechanical point of view. So asset money, you have to dig it out of the ground before you use it. You've got to protect it all the time. But also there's no incentive for asset money to move around. The difference between asset money and credit money is that somebody is always trying to get hold of that credit money because they have to pay off their debts. And so that drives it around the economy. When there's a shortage of asset money, as happened in the great bullion shortage in about the 14th century, it doesn't necessarily mean that we go into recession, because what happens is people just use credit more. And you can see that in a me-to-you transaction. You know, if I haven't got the money on me now, I'll just say, I'll give it to you later. And so you don't actually have to have asset money in order to trade, as long as there's sufficient trust or structure in the economy to support the issuance and redemption of credit. Within capitalism, which is to say over the last 600-700 years, lots of systems have grown up to help manage the credit risk. And so we have the experience now that our money, which is technically credit, is very, very solid. Like you can believe a dollar is a dollar is a dollar. And that's because there are structures in society and in the credit systems which give it that reliability. Because ultimately, a dollar is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States and all the oil in the ground and the military and all those other things. And for that reason, it doesn't lose its value very much. But if I issue an IOU, it's much flimsier because if I die or run away, the IOU becomes worthless very suddenly. So I want to talk. I want to conclude by talking about structures of credit. It's an idea I've had about how you can map a money system or describe it in terms of where all the responsibility is, where the risk is, and where the reward is, and also where the enforcement is. So if I default on a debt, what happens? Who pays? So here's a picture, and I invite you to completely redraw this yourself. It was done very quickly. The capitalist structure of credit, simplified, is people borrowing money from the banks. The bank will enforce the debt using the courts, which is, of course, the whole legal system. They can send the bailiffs around and confiscate your stuff, or they can send you to debtor's prison. And the banks themselves, as we found out in recent years, are backed by many mechanisms: deposit insurance, bailouts, and quantitative easing. In a system like Ripple, the structure of credit is very, very peer-to-peer, and I call that a mesh. So everyone is guaranteeing and backing each other. In mutual credit, you have an entity kind of in the middle, which represents all the other users to every user. And so you have collective governance of that. And that might make it a bit, well, it's a bit different to Ripple. We can skip that slide. And that's the end. And I'd like to say thank you.
Wow, thank you. That was a really nice foundation for us to build off for the rest of the show, really. That was I think a lot of people need this kind of foundational information. Julio, did you say there was a question from the audience?
Yes, what is Matthew working on right now?
I'm working on the Credit Commons, which is linked at the bottom of this slide. It's a way of using mutual credit to join together all existing money systems. And the idea is that all the complementary currencies that have ever been built haven't amounted to anything. And why don't we try connecting them all together?
Wow, so you see the currency, the Community Currency Alliance as a way of doing that, Matthew, or in that line?
I don't know what the Community Currency Alliance is, apart from a meeting place at the moment. So I'm happy to tell Community Currency Alliance about everything I'm doing, but I'm working through other institutions at the moment. I'm working with a team in London on the protocol, on the reference implementation, and so on.
Cool. Oh yeah, happy to collaborate. You know, since we have so many projects, we can bring them together and make a real money commons happen.
Thank you.
And Matthew, I'd be really curious to hear you go a little deeper on the difference between the Ripple mesh system and mutual credit system, because I don't know, I guess I always thought they were kind of the same.
Why don't we explore that after hearing from Eliza?
Okay, that sounds good. Well then, let's go dive into Eliza. You want to tell us more about Trustlines, Eliza?
Yeah, my pleasure. Also, thank you, Matthew. That was a excellent history. Very interesting. So I never introduced myself properly, but my name's Eliza, and I got into alternative currencies through my research and advocacy in basic income, universal basic income, and specifically looking at that as a monetary tool. And I also work on tech for unique identity stuff, but I'm generally drawn to the monetary, the question of how to design a better monetary system. And I think alternative currencies are great for that because they let you be proactive and experiment with different types of systems. And so that is sort of what brought me to Trustlines, which I will tell you more about with the help of this presentation. Can you see my screen? Okay, cool. So I'm going to be talking about Trustlines, the Trustlines network. Just an overview, I'm going to go through the challenges we perceive, the big picture of what is Trustlines, the details of what is a trust line. I can talk about the app and then I'll wrap things up. All right, so what is the big challenge that we're trying to address here? It is really untapped potential. Don't ignore untapped potential. People are assets, especially. They are creative and hardworking. So even in vulnerable areas, there are often resources going to waste. However, local economies are artificially constrained without the right tooling for markets. So this is often a matter of resource mapping or matching skills and needs, but it's also a matter of accounting. Complex economies need a medium of exchange. They need liquidity. So this kind of goes along with what Matthew was talking about. So while it may not be true, or it may be true that it's difficult to end poverty that is caused by scarce resources, it is nevertheless, I would say, easy to end scarcity or the arbitrary scarcity of money. And this is what I want to talk about. All right, so one way to approach this is to start understanding and dissecting different fundamental types of money. You can do this by sort of asking two questions. The first is who or what governs the money issuance? And the second would be who is benefiting from the issuance? So just as a general concept, government money would be something that is issued by the government and supposedly benefits the people through the government. And an example of this would be like euros or dollars that you hold in your wallet. Bank issued money is actually the vast majority of money in the world today. This is just accounting entries or your deposit at your commercial bank. There's also commodity money. So that's arguably a different type of money that is governed by the laws of physics. And the typical example is gold, but you could say Bitcoin or other mined cryptocurrencies are a type of commodity money. And it's also a question who benefits from that? Well, usually the miners. But that's up for discussion as well. And then lastly, there's this concept of people money or people-powered money. And this is just regular credits or debts between individuals or the people who actually are using the money. So if we go out to eat together and you pay for the meal, then I owe you, a meal. And that debt between individuals, that's a type of money, even though we don't necessarily think about it like that. Here's the big picture, the trust lines. It is a payment system based on peer-to-peer mutual credit. So you could think of it like a decentralized mutual credit network. But what is a trust line? A trust line is two credit lines issued bilaterally between two people who trust each other. So here, Alice and Bob are good friends. They know each other. They've each issued a credit line to the other. To create a trust line, Alice and Bob both have to set a credit limit. This is the highest amount that can be borrowed. So for each of them, they set a credit limit of 10. Now that they have this trust line between them, they can use that infrastructure to make payments without cash. So Alice, in this diagram, she's paying Bob by issuing 5 IOUs to him. And what this does is it increases Bob's balance and reduces hers. So Bob is +5, she's -5. And Alice can continue to pay Bob with IOUs until she hits Bob's credit limit. So if you see there's a little 15 and a number 5 at the top, Alice has 5 credits left to use to pay Bob before she runs out before she maxes out her credit line with him. So what the really innovative thing about this system is how you can use it to pay strangers. So here's Alice and Charlie. Charlie is a stranger, does not trust Alice enough to open a credit line with her, but Alice wants to pay him using credit. So how does this happen? We call this a multi-hop payment. It's also referred to as rippling. And the way it's done is there exists Bob, who is a mutual friend of Alice and Charlie. And Bob has a trust line open with both Alice and with Charlie. So Alice can send 5 IOUs to Bob, and then Bob can send 5 IOUs to Charlie. So Bob, at the end of this transaction, Bob is still net 0. To him, it's the same either way. But Alice is now, her balance is -5, and Charlie is +5. So Charlie does get, +5, but it's denominated in credit from someone he personally trusts, which is Bob. The cool thing about this is you can have a multi-hop payment with any number of people in the middle of mutual friends, and you can pay anybody over any path of connected trust lines. And due to the network effect, you really only need a small number of trust lines to be able to transact with a large number of people. It's also, some people wonder, well, why not just give myself a bunch of fake credit and abuse the network? That's really not, it's not really viable, because at the end of the day, the amount that you can spend with the network as a whole is constrained by the people who actually know and trust you. So here, Alice and Eve would be the example. Alice knows Eve in real life, and she's only going to give Eve a maximum credit line of 10. Even if Eve approaches her with different accounts, it's not going to, Alice is, they're real people. It's going to be difficult to convince Alice to open more credit lines with a bunch of fake Eves. So is this money? I think that you can definitely call this a type of money. More than that, I think it's a very interesting type of money. It's a medium of exchange that is created as needed by its users. It gets its value from real world trust relationships. And most importantly, it's accessible to anybody with a friend or anyone who has someone willing to trust them with a debt. Another cool thing to take away from this is that trust lines, you can look at a trust line as the smallest building block of mutual credit, which can be used to create complex credit relationships. So You can look at Trustlines as a whole as infrastructure for making different credit relationships interoperable. So you can have individual trust relationships that are bilateral, but you can also have community mutual credit systems that are multilateral if each person in the community opens a bilateral connection with a central account. And then by the same principle, you can have inter-community trade relationships that are that can be bilateral or multilateral. So you can have a group connecting to another group, or you can have a group of groups. Yeah, so Trustlines helps establish resilient local economies because circulation of credit can supplement a community's reliance on outside money, so government money or bank money. It can help create local, like healthier local trading circles because natural community borders will emerge determined by the natural credit limits that exist between communities. And in general, it just creates empowered communities because you have a choice in what type of money to use. And you can even choose the most helpful unit of account. And I'll go more into that now with the Trustlines app. So there's an app, get it at trustlines.app. It's very easy to start using it. You basically just have to have a friend that agrees to open a trust line with you, and then you can start transacting with anybody else who's connected. And there are several different currency networks currently in the app. These generally allow you to choose which unit of account you prefer. And each currency network there's not one Trustlines network. There are many different currency networks, and each currency network is a shared platform. So anyone who joins one currency network can inherently transact, has the potential to transact with anybody else using the same currency network. They just have to open a credit line between them. And yeah, different networks are defined by different parameters. Some of these can be different units of account. So you can use work hours or more typical euros, or there's even a favors network to trade favors with each other. And you can, some currency networks have the ability to add interest, or you could also add negative interest. Here is an example of just when we piloted the beer currency network at an Ethereum conference. You can see the network growing as people created trust lines with each other. And you can sort of get a holistic look at the network topology. So if I leave you with one thing today, it would be end the artificial scarcity of money. So I think that it is a scarcity of money, that this is something that will exacerbate the crisis that we're dealing with right now. And we've already seen that scarce money is a problem that mutual credit can solve. I think some good examples would be the Bank in Switzerland after the Great Depression and Sardex in Italy after the 2008 crash. So Trustlines allows individuals to take initiative and build on these successes by just go ahead and implement mutual credit in your own community without asking anyone for permission. So in summary, mutual credit lets us tap into the untapped potential of local economies. Trustlines is a scalable and accessible technology for mutual credit network. It can empower communities to recognize value better, to be more productive and resourceful, to be efficient, and especially to grow mutual respect. I think in the long run, maybe this can reduce our reliance on government or bank money. And yeah, so Trustlines is ready for pilots. You can download it, join our community. We've got a forum. And thank you.
Nice. That was great. Those are great foundation. One thing I didn't see you mention is that this project is actually built on a blockchain. I'm just curious of why you chose to build it on a blockchain and what value that brings.
Right. So, yeah, I kind of left that out of the presentation because I felt that sometimes the discussion of the blockchain can distract from the ultimate, thing that we're trying to do here. But yeah, why blockchain? I think blockchain is just a type of architecture that you can use to launch a very trustworthy, transparent, censorship-resistant system. So we consider Trustlines to be something that it's like very important infrastructure. It's a commons, you could say. And we don't want it to get shut down just because somebody's server fails or because it gets hacked or because your government doesn't approve of you using an alternative type of money or something like that. So I actually wasn't working on Trustlines when they built the blockchain. That was all done before I started helping out. But I think it's very interesting that they've got it going. Yeah, and it's up and running, by the way. It's an Ethereum sidechain. There was just a validator auction that, yeah, a successful validator auction, and it's live. It's really fast.
Was it are you talking about is there a second validator auction besides the first one?
Yeah, so the validators get recycled every 9 months or so. Yeah, the idea is I don't want to get too much into this, but
yeah,
you need reliable validators to keep the network running and to make sure that they don't become targets and get shut down.
Very cool.
We got a question, Elisa. What is your vision for the future in terms of monetary alternatives, mesh nets, mutual credit, things like Trustlines, also Circles is a bit on this type of paradigm. What's your vision, in the next 10 to 20 years with this sort of infrastructure, and also how can the Community Currency Alliance help with that?
My vision. I think what I really want to see is a lot of communities experimenting with new types of monetary systems. So does that count as a vision, or should I go to the logical end of I want to see a healthy monetary system that helps us build resilient economies and value fair trade practices, and also respects environmental sustainability. All of these principles are not, in some ways, you can't solve everything with money, but for sure, designing a better monetary system is going to play a role in these kinds of dramatic reforms.
One of the things I love about Trustlines is like when you really pull it out, if Trustlines is a new type of money or a different type of money than we're used to, then it's
an old type of money.
Yeah, it's an old type of money. But the cool thing is, if you're rich in Trustlines, to get rich in Trustlines, you just have to have a lot of people's trust. It's very different than getting rich in the normal world where it's a cutthroat, competitive, attacking, like I need my money, and the scarcity mindset. But in Trustlines, to have a lot of liquidity, you just need to be trustworthy. And that's amazing.
Yeah, I think you could say that. I think I would see it more as like what I see as more the focus is like that it it encourages circular economies. And so, it, like, what does it mean to get rich in a mutual credit system where money is designed to circulate? I don't know, like I would feel comfortable. I don't know. What I really like about the idea of mutual credit is it lends itself to this healthier flow system, like that I think we're really lacking in our current economy, where money kind of just trickles up and away and never comes back.
But mutual credit doesn't prevent you from getting rich. It only prevents you from getting rich by accumulating money, and especially by accumulating money and then renting it out to poor people. You can still do a lot of good work, good production, exchange it for mutual benefit and get rich in goods and services.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I guess this can let me get an answer to that question I had before, which is what's the difference between mutual credit and a ripple mesh?
Well, going back to my diagram, I drew in the middle of the mutual credit circle an imaginary entity. And in mutual credit, there is governance. So a group of people come together and they agree how they're going to issue credit to each other, how the defaults mechanism will work, and some other things. And in the credit commons, which is a tier of mutual credits, they would also agree how much balance of trade to allow with other communities. And in Ripple, there isn't that sense of a group. The mesh structure means that everybody is an individual and they're trusted individually and they trust individually. And that means some things are possible and some other things are not possible. So we need to look in any situation about what are the needs.
Yeah, I would say like, so I would say there are two sort of different-ish definitions of mutual credit. And the one that Matthew goes by, I think, is where you have a group where the risk of default is socialized and there is governance over that. Everyone in it's a system of multilateral credit. And Trustlines, or by the way, Trustlines is not a new idea. There is a project called Ripple that preceded it. If you Google Ripple, you'll find something totally different. But the original idea of Ripple was one of the things that inspired Trustlines. So that might get confusing.
Not XRP, but the Ripple paper that XRP kind of based themselves off of as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But what was I saying? I lost my train of thought.
Mutual credit is a multilateral system.
Yeah. So you could say that that's a definition of mutual credit. The way that I am defining mutual credit is possibly a little different. I don't know that. Yeah, that it can be really defined, but I see it as sort of being more about circular or reciprocal exchange. So a mutual credit relationship is one that can go back and forth, and that's sort of the most defining feature of it. And so Trustlines is like as I tried to explain, so Trustlines is based on this unit of 2 credit lines. That is a trust line. And this fundamental arrangement can be used to build more complex credit relationships. So the way that I think that a lot of people who are passionate about trust lines really love the idea of having a payment system that's based purely on bilateral trusted relationships, because that's really accessible. It's easy to join a system like that. You don't have to apply for membership or something. But it's not incompatible with this idea of having a socialized credit circle or something like that. It's just a matter of how do you arrange the bilateral relationships. If you have a Trustline account that's just a group account, a shared account, and that one account opens an equal connection to a bunch of different members, then that formation of trust lines is a socialized circle of credit. So to me, the coolest thing about this is that you can recreate existing traditional centralized systems of mutual credit with trust lines. But the way that they connect is like if you wanted to connect them today, they would have to be connected by the central account of this credit system connects to the central account of that credit system. With trust lines, that's an option, but the other option is that they're organically connected at the edges by individuals. So you can have an individual that's a member of both credit networks, and then different members can ripple transactions through that edge member, or you can have an edge member that's connected to another edge member, and they can ripple transactions through each other. And all of this leads to what I was saying about organic community borders that are determined by real trusted relationships. So yeah, stop me if I'm talking too much, but
well, maybe Matthew can respond on the definition of mutual credit. And
what you called a trust line is, I agree, it's the smallest unit of a financial system, but you were a bit ambiguous as to whether you said there are two credit lines which make up a trust line, and therefore a trust line is reciprocal or mutual. But the way I saw it is the two credit lines are actually independent of each other. And so you could have a non-mutual relationship. And so I hesitate to classify the Ripple mesh structure of credit as mutual compared to a group around a central node, which is mutual because the risk of credit default is mutualized amongst everybody in the node. It's quite a technical argument, but I think it's valuable to make it amongst ourselves in a community of specialists so that we can establish a common vocabulary and know what we're talking about. And that's why I would encourage Ripple and Trustlines and all the others to, if they want to talk about mutual credit, instead to talk about a mesh credit or Ripple credit, to refer to this very distinctive structure which deserves to stand on itself and be named. It has many implementations. I've just seen 2 implementations of Ripple coming out in the last month. And I think it's very valuable to distinguish that from mutual credit because they lead to very different consequences when you expand on them.
Yeah, it seems like Trustlines is kind of an infrastructure, I mean, it's a blockchain that could be used for a Ripple mesh, or it could be used for a mutual credit system, depending on who builds the app on top.
Yeah, but I would hesitate before defining, before nailing down the term mutual credit to something in particular, because this is a question of language. Do we approach language top down or bottom up, which is another discussion. But even what you started saying about how a trust line is made up of 2 credit lines, and it could be a one-sided relationship, and maybe that's not mutual credit. Well, actually, a one-sided credit line still assumes that transactions are going back and forth, and so to me, that the pattern of trade that results from that relationship, that's the important part, or maybe that's the important part. As long as it's not exploitative, like, you know, so I would still call this mutual credit. But I think that's just me.
Actually, Michael Linton, one of the early LED system pioneers, he actually just asked a question on the YouTube channel. Maybe it helps with the discussion. He says, how does these ideas generate patterns of exchange? And what are those patterns? Circular or back and forth, and complex in what way? Maybe this helps to a bit distinguish a bit between mutual credit, mesh nets, ripple effects, and so on. But I do agree that the sort of definition of what mutual is kind of fuzzy.
So I'm not quite sure what Michael's getting at, but I would point out that whenever a trust line is opened or a credit relationship is opened by making an exchange or doing the first half of an exchange, then it continues to be driven because someone has to close the trust line. So the debt has to be repaid. So that's a big difference between commodity money and credit money.
Yeah, I don't know. It depends on the rules of the system. Like, you know, some people are going to use trust lines with the assumption that their credits that are created using the technology have to be canceled out, you know, with actual services or goods or services that are traded in the system. And some people, like other people, are going to use trust lines. And, you know, to cancel a debt, I'll hand you a wad of cash of government money and cancel out the debt that way. And so if you're using it like that, then monies or value sort of leaves the system and goes back into the outside monetary system and the outside economy. So it's not, to me, I don't know, it's not a question of, yeah, it's how you use the system, whether that determines whether the value flows are going to stay local and healthy or not.
I think that's what Michael might have been getting at. If you create a local circle of credit, you're going to be driving local trade.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of how I expect to use trust lines. I mean, I feel like trust lines is, sometimes it gets a little funny when you start quantifying your trust in people. And that can always be a challenge because you're quantifying something that's qualitative and, oh man, problems, right? But I love this idea of being able to just be like, you know what? Hey, I trust you up to 500 bucks. I know if I needed 500 bucks, you would give it to me, you know? And so that's easy, you know, we'll do it. Or I know that you would give me $10 if I hit you up for $10 one day. Okay, so I'll make a trust line with you. We make these trust lines, and then we can actually be generating money on top of the basic monetary system. And we start using that instead because honestly, the app is just better than the normal fiat world where I'm trying to get these euros, which are hard to get. Dude, I have the trust right here and I don't have to think about it. We go out to eat, somebody buys the bill, and then everyone just, you know, throws them, you know, five DAI worth of trust line, and it eventually it's all balances out in the wash. And then, hey, maybe I get in a tough time, or maybe I'm not in a tough time. Maybe I just want to, you know, buy a car or something, and I could go get a loan, or I could just look at my trust lines and just be like, start talking to these people and say, hey, can I get, like, you know, it says here that you would give me 20 bucks. Is that real? Like, can I max that out right now? So I really want to get this car. Then I can be an Uber driver, get the fiat money from this other world, and I can start paying you guys back. Or maybe I'll try to just buy all the meals from here on out, you know, and this, it doesn't necessarily always end up as oh, I'm going to go to the store and use trust lines, but like for a small group of friends. And then if it can start there, then it can grow, and then these groups connect. I don't know. I see a lot of opportunity with the trust lines as a tool.
We have two questions. Maybe we can try to like fit them in together. First, we have Samuel Contreras is asking, what are the limits of credit and debt in trust lines, if there are, and who decides these parameters? And then the second question is by Alison Malisa, who was asking about Matthew's differentiation between mesh and mutual credit again, because for her it sounded like what she understood mutual credit to be. So again, the fuzziness of of language.
So sure, yeah, I'll take the first question, which is how do the credit limits get defined? They are chosen individually by whoever's creating the credit line. If you have something like a central account that is being used to, in a traditional mutual credit kind of a way, then the central account would maybe have rules that, everyone opening a trust line with me needs to have, a credit limit of 50 on both sides. But it's the users who decide those credit limits.
Yeah.
Hypothetically, you could create sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think hypothetically you could create a new currency network that has, rules about that. But this is how what currently exists. This is how it works.
I mean, Aliza and I opened up a trust line. It was for 150 DAI. And we just decided it's not backed by anything other than I think that if I needed 150 DAI, I could send her 150 Trustlines DAI and she would send me 150 DAI. But what was the second question?
Yeah, about the definition of between mesh credits and Ripple credit and mutual credit, basically from Matthew, maybe to separate the differences between the mesh and a mutual credit, because it wasn't really clear for Alison.
Well, I'm trying to work towards a useful working definition. And so for me, a mutual credit means that the risk of default is mutualized. Whereas in Ripple, where everyone can make relationships with everybody, the risk of default kind of passes along the line. If your friend doesn't pay, then whoever backs them has to pay. And it's not mutualized or organized in any consensual or mutual process.
But then here, my question then will be to go a bit further. What is mutual then? Because mutual could be between two people, or it could be, I think in the sense that you made it, is between a people and a community that has this node that you mentioned before. And so, yeah, where to draw that boundary of where the mutual begins and ends? Is it a co-production of money between two people or more people in the network? Or is it in a hub in a specific node? This is, I guess, the boundaries, right?
We need to settle on a working definition because yes, mutuality can exist between any two entities in the universe and take any possible form.
What's the difference between a normal credit system and a mutual credit system as you define it? Like a credit card, effectively the credit card issuer is backing a default.
Well, it's certainly a one-way relationship with the credit card. In the fact, you're borrowing the money, and if you don't pay it, they'll come and get you. I don't see any depth to that question. Did I miss something?
Well, just that there is like a credit card company is backing the default, right? If they pay out, if they lend money to this person, then this person spends money, the money would still get paid to.
So that's what the banks and other financial institutions do. They, you could argue, mutualize, socialize, or distribute the risk of default amongst their members by taking it out of their profits. Mm-hmm. So whether you think the other members pay or the company pays because it's reduced profit is a matter of how you look at it. And ultimately, you could say that all debts, all defaults are mutualized if they result in a government bailout. That means we're all paying in one form or another, even if it doesn't show as your balance account going down. Mm-hmm. We're paying through inflation or other hidden mechanisms.
And then in a mutual credit system, instead, if there's a default, then the people who join the mutual credit system, they probably put in some collateral or something to
Well, you
bail
can
out.
have a transaction fee or a membership fee, or you can just keep a little pot to cover defaults. But the point is that the members decide it themselves. because it's their credit, their risk, their reward, and their governance.
Okay.
Matthew, do you have a question? Last question here from Jeff Emmett. He's asking, what other forms of currency do you see complementing mutual credit, and how do people pool funds to pay for collective goods on their mutual credit system?
Well, understand that mutual credit is not money. You can't go and buy capital intensive goods with mutual credit unless the capital intensive goods producers are somehow in your mutual credit network. So mutual credit, and in fact all credit, only exists within the context of relationships. And if you want to trade outside of those relationships, you need something harder, something with value that comes from outside, something exogenous to those relationships in order to pay. I think that answers the question in a nutshell, but maybe clarification would be sought.
Well, actually, though, we are out of time, so we should probably call it right there. Let's just do a quick closing round. Matthew, do you have any links that people can follow to learn more about your work?
Well, I'll just put a link in the chat to an article I wrote some time ago about Ripple and managing the balance of trade, which seems very topical right now. Otherwise, go and have a look at creditcommons.net and my website, mattslats.net. Follow me on Twitter @mattslats.
Boom. And Eliza?
Yeah, just quick answer to that last question. I think universal basic income currencies can absolutely coexist with mutual credit systems, and this is something I want to see. Yeah, and you can test out the Trustlines app at trustlines.app and get involved. We've got a bunch of chat rooms, a forum. Yeah, let me know how it goes also.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Please subscribe and hit like if you like this video and want to see more content and want more people to get to see it. It helps us a lot.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everybody.
guys.
Thank you, Matt.